Okay, there we go. Perfect. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened with my headphones, but I think I need to beat someone up. So sorry, I'm going to go backwards a little bit. So I was saying that one of the most important things that I do is carry a book around with me all the time to write down ideas, to keep track of, silly ideas that come to me if I'm in the gym or if I'm having a conversation with a friend or, if I'm cooking dinner or anything else. So, and it doesn't have to be a book. You can use Evernote or, audio messaging or anything like that. But it's always just important to record those ideas, because sometimes the things that come to you at the weirdest time can be the best ideas. I think it's really important to read. So the best entrepreneurs that I know are the ones that are really interested. They're reading TechCrunch, they're reading Tech.eu, they're conscious of, different businesses that are starting up. They're reading the comments on Hacker News or Reddit. They're on product hunt on an ongoing basis to, see new businesses that are launching. They're looking at Startup List and Beta List and these other businesses to, find out what's going on in their markets and, get some insight into what people are doing. So I think it's really important to read as much as you can and be as aware as you can about what you're working on. This is also really important. So I see probably hundreds of pitches from companies every week who want to be part of Techstars, who want me to invest in them, who want, anything. And so a lot of them are, what we would think of as Me Too businesses. So they're companies that are, the Uber for dog walking, or, companies that are very similar to something that's already in the market. And one of the biggest things that I look for when I'm making an investment is an entrepreneur who's scratching an itch that they face themselves. So I look for companies that are solving problems that people face every day. I love working with companies who are, maybe someone who has been in the legal profession for a long time and has identified an issue that they can solve with technology, or someone who can tell a really compelling story about why they created a business to solve a particular problem that they had in their working life or in their personal life. So I think scratching itches is extremely important. And similarly, what's the unfair advantage that you have in your business? What is the X factor that you have? Do you know everyone in a particular industry? Have you spent 10 years researching a particular piece of, machine learning or artificial intelligence that you can now commercialize? What is the extra bit that you can kind of add in to, give your business a better chance of succeeding? Removing friction, again, if you see things in your everyday life, in business or in your personal life, where people are wasting time or spending more time than they need to on products or on issues, is there a way that you can remove some of that friction for them and help, improve their lives or make their lives a little bit easier? This is another important one. I always think that you should be able to explain your business clearly. And so I always wonder, when people pitch me, especially ideas around artificial intelligence or computer vision or medical technology, how do you make that product really simple? Could you explain what you're doing to your grandparents, and would they actually understand it if you said it to them? I think that leads me to my next point, which is it's really important to talk. I think it's very important to, solicit feedback on your product from customers, from, friends, from peers, from others. I see a lot of companies make the mistake of never telling anyone what they're actually working on, because they're afraid someone will steal the idea, and, that almost never happens. And, I think you should always just be conscious that having conversations, especially with customers and potential users, is a great way to get great feedback and to get great insight into what works about you and your business and your idea. And I think this is also important. If you go out and you start talking to people about your business, it's very important to listen to what they say. One of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is they'll go and say, "Oh, I'm building a new company. It's an artificial intelligence engine that will do, medical imaging. Do you think that's a good idea?" And of course, people will always want to be nice and say yes. So you've got to ask people open questions. You've got to, listen to what people are saying. Don't just talk over them. Don't just automatically pitch them all the time. If you're taking time to have a conversation with someone about your business, you should naturally be listening to what they have to say in return, because I think that's hugely important. And it's hugely important to ask questions, right? Don't just pitch when you're out meeting people at a networking event, or if you're at a demo day or a startup weekend, or any of these types of events. Be sure that you're asking people questions about your business, that you're not just giving them your 1-minute pitch or 2-minute pitch, that you're kind of actually asking them open questions about what's some of these that you have. And these are some great examples, and I'll share the slides from this webinar a little bit later on, so you can see some of these examples. But closed questions are things like, do you think we're doing the right thing? Or can I email you an update every week? Because of course they're answers that people can only say yes or no to. I think what you want are open questions where you say, I'm building a new advertising technology solution, and I'm wondering, how do you currently solve this problem? How could we help make that better? What is it that keeps you awake at night? So make sure you're asking kind of open questions as you're in the kind of idea generation stage of your business, because I think it's hugely important. So let's move on to prototyping. And again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer them as I'm talking, or we'll have some time, I think, at the end as well to answer some questions. So this is the next stage. So you've had your idea, you've talked to a couple of people, you've got some feedback. People think it's potentially an interesting idea. So what do you do next? Well, you want to start wireframing and prototyping and testing, and doing that over and over and over again, so that you get to the best possible version of your business. And so here are a few tools that I use to do this. And these are ones, at the top here, Pop and Kenotopia are two great ones. So even if, for the people who are on this webinar today who don't have any background in design or who aren't designers, these are tools that allow anyone, even me, and I'm a terrible designer, to put together very basic wireframes and designs and mock-ups for what an application or a website might look like. So just very, very useful tools that you can engage with and use to just build very basic versions of what you want to work on, and then, as we'll talk about in a moment, take them out, let people see them, get that feedback, and iterate and improve upon those ideas. If you want to work with professional designers, these are some websites where you can find them. So 99 Designs is a place where you can pitch for designers to do work on logos or front end for websites, etc. Dribble and Behance are social networks for designers, where you will see some great work from people. You can contact them and you can ask them to potentially help with your business. I mean, in these three cases, you'll have to obviously pay. These Kenotopia and Pop, you can obviously work on yourself, but just some ones to be aware of. If you've got some design assets already, these are tools that will allow you to make almost a clickable prototype of your product. So, with Keep, the first round of funding that we raised was done with a clickable PDF. So you could click through various different screens, and it looked like you were actually using the product, but really all it was some cleverly put together PowerPoint slides. And when you clicked in specific areas, it would take you to the next slide. These allow you to make a much better version of that. So Marvel, Fluid UI, and Proto.io are all excellent prototyping tools that you can use to make mock-ups and prototypes of mobile applications or desktop applications. So again, just a great way for you to kind of use, put some design elements in, see what it would actually look like. It works on your phone as well, so you can create it so that it looks really, really like a working application, so that you can demo it for potential users, for potential customers, and for potential partners. So making kind of clickable prototypes is a great way to solicit feedback, to get interesting opinions from people, and to hopefully help you kind of build out the business. And I think the other thing you've got to do is lose your shame as you go through this process. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, as you're building prototypes, you're going to have to go out and start talking to people. You're going to have to get feedback from potential users, from potential customers, from potential clients. Do they like the idea of what's working, what's not, what are the good parts, what are the bad parts? And I think it's really, really important to lose your shame and not worry too much about the feedback that you get. It's better to get bad feedback and change things around before you actually launch your product, rather than getting terrible feedback when it's actually in the market, and it's much more difficult for you to work with. And this is a really interesting tip that someone gave me once, which is if you want to get very valid feedback from people and you want to see if you've got a great idea or not, go to a bus stop or a tram stop or a public train station or something like this, and go and show people your application, right? Allow them to see that journey, show them the clickable prototype, and let them see what that experience is like and what your application is like. But don't tell them what the name of your product is, right? Let them try it out, let them see what it's like, let them get a feel for how it works and what it does and what the use case is, but never ever tell them the name. And you've got a winning business if when you finish that process they say, that was brilliant, I really want the name of that application, I really want to download it. So I think that's a really interesting one. Go talk to people in public transport locations and don't tell them what your app is called. And if they ask you, then I think you're onto something really special. And don't be afraid if the first version of your product is not great. This is what the first version of Google looked like, so nothing to be ashamed of there. This is the very first version of Facebook when Mark Zuckerberg launched it in Harvard back in 2004. This was the very first Apple homepage long time ago. And, for a company that loves design, things have changed an awful lot in 20 or 25 years. A homepage that maybe hasn't changed so much is Yahoo. But this is a great quote from Reid Hoffman, who's the CEO was the CEO of LinkedIn, but it's the founder of LinkedIn, who said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. So just some things to remember as you're prototyping. Done is better than perfect. You don't need to have a perfect version of your prototype to test it on people or to get feedback. You don't need to have absolutely perfect spot-on designs. You just have to try, talk to people, don't pitch them, listen to the answers that they give you and ask open questions. Make sure you talk to people that you don't know and listen to them, and lose your shame. Don't be afraid to talk to strangers, because I think one of the things that you'll have to do as an entrepreneur is do that over the lifetime of your business. So that's the prototyping stage. Then some things just to think about as you're building your product and as you're kind of thinking about your messaging and your proposition and so forth. People are accustomed to speed nowadays. So anyone who uses Instagram will be aware of how quickly photographs upload and how quickly people can kind of access their images online. So one of the things that Instagram did extremely well in the early days of their products was the photographs started uploading much earlier within the app than people thought. So as you see here, as soon as you took the photograph, as you were adding in the metadata around, tagging your location or who was in the photograph with you and which networks to share on and typing in the caption, they were automatically uploading. So when you actually pressed share, the photograph was 99% uploaded already, and so it felt like magic that it was going up so quickly. Whereas a lot of the other photo sharing apps that were out at that time in the market started uploading at the point at which you'd entered all of this data, and so they uploaded here and the experience felt an awful lot slower. So making your product really fast is extremely important. People have very limited patience nowadays, and so I think being able to deliver an experience to people in a fast and kind of timely manner is extremely important. So whatever you're building, make sure that it works fast. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. If you're building applications, native iOS and Android applications tend to work faster than cross-platform or mobile web applications. There are a number of kind of programming languages out there that perform slightly better in terms of web speeds now. So just things to be aware of if you're building and scaling applications. Think about where your hosting is. Obviously if you're trying to get users in Japan and your hosting is in Norway, then there might be some issues. Make it very clear what your company does, and this is a really important one. So one of the reasons Groupon, which was a group deal site and big deal site, one of the reasons it was so successful was it was very easy to understand what it did. So when you went onto their website, it said extremely clearly, you're here to save 50 to 90% on various different items. So you were under no illusions about what it was that you were there to do and what the offer was that they were going to present to you. So make it very clear what your company does. And this comes back to something I mentioned earlier where, can you explain your idea to your grandparents? Can you explain your idea in a very simple and easy way. So I think that's a really, really important one to be aware of. Make it very, very clear what it is that you do and why it's special. I think make it easy to use is another really key one. So here you can see where the arrow is pointing. Some of you may be aware of a tool called Buffer, which is a social media sharing tool. It allows you to share pages and content to your followers on various different social media channels. And what they did was made it as simple as just a button that sits in your browser. And so if you're on a page that you think is going to be interesting to your followers on Twitter or Facebook or elsewhere, you can just tap on that and it will automatically share that page and allow you to add in a caption for Twitter, or it'll automatically allow you to save it for later so that you can share it with your followers later. So just a very simple integration that fitted very well into the workflow of a lot of people. This is a company that I invested in recently called Drink Easy. Drink Easy is a pocket sommelier. So if you want nice wine, craft beer, spirits, anything like that, they will recommend. They'll learn your taste over time. They'll send you some recommendations via text message or via Facebook Messenger. If you see something that you like, you just reply saying "hell yes," and it will send you out a bottle of what you want. So again, just a very, very simple user experience, very, very obvious way to engage with users, and a very simple product that fits into people's use cases. When you're building, think about what it is, what's the action that you want people to take. So I'm sure some of the people on the webinar today are Snapchat users. So Snapchat is a great example of driving a specific action within a product. So any of you who are Snapchat users know that the first thing that you see when you open the app is the camera screen. So you're automatically shown exactly what it is that you're supposed to do, right? The default action within Snapchat is taking a photograph and sharing it with your friends, or taking a photograph and sharing it with your, or sharing it in your story. They're not, there's no feed, there's no anything else. You've got to scroll to the right of the screen to see the feed. So think about what it is that you want users to do as soon as they come in. So on Instagram, they know lots of people will browse through the photographs, and the feed is the most important thing. And then subsequently, you can go and take a photograph and share a photograph. On Twitter or on Facebook, they go straight in and show you your news feed, because they know the bulk of users will browse through those. And for Facebook and Twitter in particular, they obviously need people to experience that news feed in order to serve them advertisements and generate revenue. So, as you build your app, what is it that you want users to do, and how do you get them into that action straight away? So if you want people to be using the camera, you need to open on the camera screen. If you want people to use your product to find their way around, maybe you need to open on the map screen. If you want people to share information, you may need to open on a slightly simpler screen where they can, type in information or tag where they are, etc. So I think just thinking about what you want users to do and making it, I think Mustafa has said it perfectly here, right? It should be lean. It should be really, really simple. It should be really clear to understand what it is, what's the action that you want people to take, and allow them to take it in, and again, this comes back to the speed that I mentioned earlier, where I think it's really important that people can get into your application and start taking actions extremely quickly. And here's the reason why, right? Most people and most users don't understand what they're supposed to do when they get into most applications, unfortunately. What you will find, and we see it all the time, especially with applications where you have a lot of people doing very different design features into a product, or into a site or an application, is where there is confusion, people will just drop off or drop away or stop using the product. So the clearer that you make it, the simpler that you make it, the easier that you make it for them to engage with what you want, the better the response that you will see. And I think that's just really, really important to think about. Always assume that people will be confused by your application, and keep striving for that real simplicity of user experience. I think that's crucial. And I think Mohammed, you said it there, easy to understand and allow for a quick response. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think the other thing is, thinking about how you can make your product social. So, can you connect to Facebook, Twitter, Messenger, your phone book, anything that allows people to share your product or the content that they generate within your product is important. I think don't be spammy. There have been a lot of products in the past, both recent and far past, which have spammed people. So they've sent a message out. LinkedIn famously used to do it, where they would send a message to everyone in your address book. There are lots of others that did it via SMS. So I think these are very powerful tools. Be careful not to annoy people. Be careful not to kind of, do anything that could be construed as spamming people, because it's just extremely negative to do that, and you can very quickly get a bad name for yourself for doing it as well. Someone's mentioned great interactive prototype tools. Actually, InVision is a really powerful prototyping tool, particularly if you've got some design skills. It can be a little bit more complex than some of the ones that I shared, but extremely powerful if you've got the right folks using it. So, but back to make your tools social. They can be a direct channel to your users, to your market. They can be a great way to drive kind of viral growth and help scale your company. But as I said, just be very, very wary of overusing them, or of being guilty of spamming people in any way. Think about the right APIs as well. A great example is if you're building a product that has any sort of location element involved in it, then Foursquare is an incredible API that will allow you. You can plug into it and use their location layer to access all sorts of useful information and data about venues and places around the world. They've got significant geographical coverage now. So, as you're thinking about different, I think one of the interesting things nowadays is it's actually quite a bit cheaper to build a product, because there are so many SDKs and APIs available for people. So, and I'll talk about it in a moment. You don't need to build an entire messaging product into your application, because you can use the Intercom API. You don't necessarily need to build a location layer into your product and populate it yourself, because you can use the Foursquare API. I think just thinking about all of the different tools that are out there that you can use that will augment your products and that will help you potentially get it to market faster. I think there are tons and tons of APIs out there. And again, having a look on Product Hunt and other sites like that, I think is a great way to discover these, and a great way to kind of understand how to best integrate them to get the best results for you and for your business. I think another really important thing to build into your product is some sort of feedback loop, so that you can kind of have an ongoing conversation with your users. And so I mentioned it a moment ago, Intercom is a great tool that allows you to connect with people via, everything from push notifications and email through to kind of user surveys and live chats and so forth. Zendesk is another one that we use at a lot of companies that I've invested in to do customer support. And I think great companies are ones that have ongoing conversations with their users. So I think it's just really important to integrate those tools and to have that conversation. And likewise, in the early stages when you're building, using tools like TestFlight to allow you to do some beta testing with closed user groups and get real valid feedback on what you're building is hugely powerful. I think also kind of doing research on your users and on your potential market. Taking a look at forums and blogs and platforms like Reddit or Quora. How do you find out, where these people are? What are they talking about? What are they engaging with? Quora is a great place to look for questions about businesses that are similar to yours that have started and succeeded or failed in the past. So I think it's a great place to get some real good intel. And likewise, Reddit, Hacker News, and some of the news sites are great places to find an audience, to engage with them, to get some feedback. Because again, similar to what I mentioned earlier, having an ongoing conversation with your users and your user base, from the earliest to the latest stages of your business is just so incredibly important. I think another interesting thing to consider, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later as well, is as you're building, is there a partner that you can work with, that can potentially help you launch in your chosen markets or to your chosen audience. So this is a graphic of a company called Lawson's in Japan. So when Keep launched in Japan, we did a partnership with Lawson's, who are a very large retail outlet in Japan, who have hundreds, probably thousands, in fact, of retail stores and convenience stores around the country. We partnered with them, and this poster that you can see on the screen here appeared in every Lawson's around Japan for 2 weeks around our launch. So it gave us a huge boost in terms of awareness, visibility, user numbers, and so forth when we were going into that market. So it was just incredibly beneficial for us. And I'll talk about a couple of partnerships that some of my other companies have worked on recently that have again allowed them to get in front of a big audience. But having these conversations as you're building is hugely valuable. And again, I think you can do some great research into the types of companies that you could and should partner with as part of your build process. And there's a whole bunch of things that you can benefit from if you get the right partners on board. Speaking of onboard, user onboarding is hugely important as well. So how you allow the users to take their first few steps in your product is hugely important. You obviously don't want it to be too confusing or difficult for them to engage with. You don't want it to be confusing in any way. This is an incredible website called User Onboarding, where they do step-by-step deconstructions of onboarding processes for some of the biggest games and apps and products in the world. So you can get some incredible insights into some great tips and some do's and some don'ts in terms of how to get people onto your app, how to get people engaged with it, how to harvest information, email addresses, names, etc., in a very simple way. So I definitely highly recommend spending a couple of hours looking at this. I know it's one of my favorite websites. I can't recommend it enough. But your onboarding process is so important when it comes to making sure that you get your user engaged, and it can go a really, really long way towards helping you retain those users over time as well. As you get closer and closer to your actual launch, start getting real people to try your product. So this is a site called User Testing, which is, as the name suggests, a product that allows you to go and get real people to test your product. They have a free version of it called Peek, peek.usertesting.com, where you can get 5 minutes of feedback from someone. So they'll see your product on a screen. There's a video camera that records their reaction, and they'll give you feedback on, that onboarding process or their first impressions of the application, or, the language that you used in the product, etc. So user testing, again, we spend a lot of time both doing this in person and virtually, but it's just incredibly important to get qualified feedback, especially from people you don't know, because I'm sure we've all had business ideas and great ideas that we've told our parents or our brothers or our friends, and of course they always say, yes, you're great, you should keep doing it, and then you tell a total stranger and they say you're an idiot. So it's good to get feedback, qualified feedback at every step of the process, and user testing is a great way to do that. And I think it's important to do all of these things, because if you get it right, you have the potential to create what they call a viral loop. So I'm going to just share something in the chat here. Actually, there's a guy called Great Book to Read, by Nir Eyal. So there's a guy in Stanford, in California, called Nir Eyal, who wrote a book called Hook, which is all about kind of creating viral loops and habits amongst users. And his kind of theory is that, this idea of a viral loop comes from, seeing something that creates a desire to take an action. So that might be, I'm walking down the street, I see a beautiful sunset, so I take my phone out and open the Instagram app. I click and take the photograph and think, that looks incredible, click through and share that with my friends. And then the next step is, obviously I get likes or comments on that post, and I think, oh, everyone thinks my photography is brilliant, so I'm going to, next time I see a beautiful sunset or a flower, I'll remember to use Instagram. So there's kind of positive reinforcement built in there. And if you can create that viral loop, it's hugely engaging, because obviously you want people to share content and to talk about your app and to tell their friends or to tell their colleagues, if you're building a B2B app, about how it's made their life better. Because if you can do that, you obviously want this, right? So this is this concept of a viral coefficient. The idea being that obviously you want, for every one person that you tell about your product, you want them to tell 2 or 3 of their friends. So if I tell one person and they just keep telling one person over and over again, you'll get this kind of linear progression here, right? So, sorry, I'm drawing this very badly because I'm doing it on a mouse pad, but you get a linear progression, whereas obviously what you want is if I tell someone about my product and they tell 2 of their friends, and each of those 2 friends tells 2 of their friends, then you're getting much closer to that hockey stick that we had a little bit earlier. So I think, if you get these onboarding tips right, and I'll talk about a few other tricks that you can use in a couple of minutes, that can really help with this viral coefficient. And I think, again, Mustafa has made a good point. Creating that viral loop is difficult, and there are a lot of applications out there, competing for people's attention. But hopefully, some of the tips today will help you stand out a little bit from the crowd and give you a little bit of an edge. At the very minimum, do the basic things right. I see a lot of companies get very basic things wrong on their websites and so forth. There's no click to call or call to action or anything like that. So I think, get the basics right. I think also, remember, your users are going to need to be pulled in. They're not just going to realize that if you build an app and release it, they're not just going to suddenly a light switch is not going to go on over their head and they'll go and download it. You need to tell people that you exist. You need to build a bit of a buzz, and that starts before you even release the application. So you want to be talking to potential users and influencers or journalists. Don't annoy them, but talk to them and let them know that this is coming. Use test flight to get feedback from people. Get people you don't know testing your products. Talk to people about partnerships early on. Ask open questions again. Don't pitch. Listen is really important. So let's talk a little bit about launching and scaling. So how to launch? Well, the first thing you should do is develop a strategy around marketing and launch, and spend some time doing this. Again, a lot of companies, I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with through Techstars or in other accelerators, or companies that I've met over the years who've just assumed that, as soon as they release their product, the world will somehow hear about it and they'll all become billionaires. And the reality is you need to work really hard for the world to find out about your product. I think we talked about it a moment ago. There's a lot of stuff out there. There are a lot of great ideas and great businesses out there. So there's a lot of competition in the market, and standing out and doing a strong launch is key. So think about, are you having an event? Is it going to be a virtual launch? Are you going to invite people? Are you going to have a media partnership or an exclusive with a publication like TechCrunch or Mashable? And a lot of tech publications will look for exclusives. If you send the same press release to The Next Web, TechCrunch, Tech.eu, and others, a lot of them just won't cover you. So try and build a little bit of a personal relationship, and I'll talk about that in the PR context in a minute. Is there a news story that you can create or jump into to add a little bit of value? Do you have a special offer for your first few users? So, Drink Easy, the application that I talked about earlier, the Pocket Sommelier, the first couple of users there got discounts and discount codes that they could share with their friends, and so there was a level of exclusivity that was great. Can you work with influencers? Can you work with partners? And this is an important one. How I would really strongly encourage people to think about, how do I get to 1,000 people? How do I get into 1,000 people's hands if I'm launching a consumer product? And actually, that should be easier than you think, because most people know a lot of people who know a lot of people. And once you get 2 or 3 layers down in friends and family, you should be able to reach lots of people quickly, or at least find connections into the media that can help with that. But then also think, well, what would it take for you to get to 5,000? Would I have to stand outside a train station wearing a T-shirt with a megaphone, or would I have to buy Facebook ads, or any of these things? So just be thinking about these questions as you go along. The right partners can be really key. So this is a company called Party with a Local that I invested in, which again allows people to find people in cities that they're traveling to around the world to go out and hang out with. They did a partnership with Bud Light, and Bud Light, as they launched a new events feature, tweeted them out to hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter. So again, great kind of synergy between those two audiences, between those two user bases. between the different types of consumers on there. So, just finding the right partner can be hugely beneficial. And again, this is a company called Paranoid Fan, which is a company that kind of does live event mapping, so allowing you to find the shortest queue for the restroom at a football game, or find the quickest queue to get food at a concert and so forth. They did a partnership with the Jacksonville Jaguars NFL team, and this was on the giant jumbotron scoreboard before the game a couple of weeks ago, where they were playing the Oakland Raiders. And you can see here, this is the Paranoid Fan app and branding and download links and URLs and everything else. And again, through this partnership, they got in front of tens of thousands of people at the stadium. They were sent out in email blasts. They were sent out in push notifications, and again, just generated huge amounts of kind of engagement and interest and downloads for them. So partnerships can be really key. Media is really important. I mean, again, this comes back to the list of reading pages I talked about earlier, where think about these types of sites. These are places that you probably want to start showing up. Beta lists and startup lists are two great ones when you're very early stage to just get feedback from people. The Next Web, TechCrunch, Product Hunt, those are places that you should definitely be going when you're launching your product. To engage with the media, there's two links here. One is from Mike Butcher, the editor at large at TechCrunch, just talking about how the press release is dead and how to pitch him and how to get his attention. And just below us, Blonde 2.0 are a PR agency. They have a great series called How to Pitch Me, where they interview leading tech journalists from around the world and get information on how they like to be pitched. Do they prefer a DM on Twitter, or do they like a press release, or do they like videos, or so pitching to journalists is tricky, right? They're busy people, but I think there's some good tips in there that will help you along with that. I think other hygiene factors to be aware of, when you're launching a new business, technology businesses in particular, you're at least going to want to be visible on most of these sites. So most investors will use AngelList, they'll use Crunchbase as they're doing due diligence and looking into your business. They'll look at LinkedIn and stalk you on there. F6S is the site that we use for all of our Techstars applications, and that's used by a lot of other accelerator programs and incubator programs. So get your profile, get your information, think about it on there, and make sure that it's consistent across all of them. I think these are just some kind of a few final tips, and then we'll have time for some questions, I think, at the end. So when you engage with people, whether it's journalists or your users or influencers or potential partners, be personal. This is really, really important. I get mail merge emails all the time from people. People pitch me things that I'm never going to invest in, and it's pretty easy, right? If you look up my profile on AngelList or anything that I've talked about at conferences or events before, or anything I've blogged about in the past, you should pretty quickly be able to pick up what it is that I'm interested in, the areas that I invest in, and get a good picture for what I'm not interested in. And so when someone pitches me and says they're raising $10 million for a crowdfunding platform for real estate, right, in New Zealand, that's probably wasting their time and mine, because I don't invest in real estate. I don't really invest in crowdfunding, and even though my wife is from New Zealand, I don't invest in New Zealand because it takes me a long time to get there. So I think be personal. If you're pitching me something, find something that I've written recently, or find an investment that I've already made and say, oh, we know you invested in Party with a Local, so we'd love to tell you a little bit more about our products. We think it's in a similar area. And it's really easy to do this, but most companies don't. And the same is true of, if you're pitching to partners, make sure you find the right person to talk to within a, partner or client organization. Make sure you figure out the right thing to say to them. Make sure you make it, personal and engaging, because, you're talking to a human being, and it's important to treat them as such. Don't be annoying. So this is two examples of mail merge messages that I got recently. So one is absolutely appalling. So first of all, they said, hello, merge contacts underscore first name, which hopefully you've realized by now is that's not actually my first name. And then they said, I'm really keen to discuss how we can support your agency's future growth. Now, I don't run an agency, so I'm not sure why they sent that to me. But it was just an annoying one, and very presumptuous tone as well. And this was another one. Hello, Eamonn. I saw an article today confirming native advertising in the UK. 13% of your budget will be dedicated to native advertising next year. Again, first of all, I'm interested in the advertising industry, and I know that is not true. And second of all, I don't have a native advertising budget. So again, they're just blasting emails out to an email list that they clearly bought, and it's wasting my time, it's wasting their time, and it's just super, super annoying. And I remember things like that, and I know a lot of other investors do as well. This is another one that's interesting, and it's tricky because spelling across multiple different languages is difficult at the best of times. But spell check is really important because one of the things, I mean, if you think about it from an investor perspective, they're always looking for reasons to say no. And so what you've got to do is figure out as many reasons for them to say yes as is humanly possible. And so I think, making sure that everything in your presentation and your materials looks good and makes sense and is, spell checked and so forth it's really, really important, because what you don't want is the perception that you're lazy or that you're slack in some areas, because and it is kind of a weird way to think about it, but I sometimes think if someone messes up the spelling in a presentation or in an email, and I'm very obviously forgiving where there are language differences and difficulties, but if someone makes those types of mistakes, will they make other similar mistakes elsewhere in the company in the future? Make your emails short. So again, we get a couple of hundred emails every day, and I do try and reply to as many of them as I can. The better it is usually. I think it's usually unbelievably important to get to the point quickly. And again, I'll share this presentation so you can all have time to take a look at it. But short, personal, and to the point is much more likely to get a good response from me and from lots of other people. So I think just be conscious of that. Flattering people works. This is an email that the CEO of Keep sent to the CEO of American Express. So he wrote that he was recently in the one of the youngest people to ever raise venture funding, and then said to the CEO, "You're inspiring, leading the charge of building the world's freshest financial everything company. It's awesome and daunting at the same time. You've brought a lure to points that people fight tooth and nail for. It's mind-blowing." Said lots and lots of other things. This email got Brian a meeting with the CEO of American Express within a week, and American Express ended up investing in our next round of funding off the back of that. So again, just being personal, being nice, being pleasant and flattering the ego was hugely, hugely powerful. Simple tips for people, right? I mean, use Product Hunt and Twitter search, and there's lots of other tools out there to find people who are talking about your sector or your competitors or your area of interest, and talk to people who are doing that. Favorite their tweets, follow them, engage with them, reply to their comments on Product Hunt, or find them on Product Hunt and follow them on Twitter and say, "Oh, I loved what you said about this product." As I say, be brief. Don't send very long emails. Just enough to get my attention. Again, think about creating videos. There are lots of places that can help you with this. Aptamin being one. You can also, Windows Movie Maker and QuickTime on a Mac is great. And find influencers, journalist podcasts, who might be interested, and just start thinking about your elevator pitch and making it really simple to engage with them. Nearly at the end, I promise. Still with me? No one's typed a message for a little while, but I'm taking it that you're still with me. You're intrigued by everything that I'm saying, I hope. Cool. Thank you for the replies. So a couple of other final things to think about, right? Buying users is tempting, but it can be the wrong decision, right? So right now, if you want to acquire a iOS user in the United States using a Facebook app install ad, you can pay anything from $2 up to $10, depending on how targeted you are. In other markets, it's a lot less. We're doing app install campaigns for 10 cents. a user in some markets in the Middle East. But the problem is you can use it to get some short-term boosts in terms of your numbers, but it only starts to become really valuable to do it when you've figured out your engagement and retention curves. So you want to make sure that, when people come into your product and they go through the onboarding process, you want to make sure they come back at least a couple of times, and that, your retention rates are good before you start spending money on advertising. Because, it's something, I see it a lot. People will come in and go, oh, we've got this great app. We have 100,000 users. The numbers are great. We're, acquiring users at this rate every day. And then when you look at their retention numbers, it's, 2% of their users are coming back on a monthly basis. So you've got to get, the fundamentals right before you start spending. And, again, lots of companies have wasted a lot of their investors' money and their own money and their incubator and accelerators' money buying users to no avail. So I would just caution, always be wary of going down that path, because, most investors can see through it if you're acquiring users, but your, lifetime value and your retention rates are not good enough. And this is important. Don't get hooked on cheap installs. You need to figure out what your customer acquisition cost is versus your lifetime value, and then you can start thinking about, what networks do you go to, what channels do you use to acquire people. And when it works, it can be amazing. I had a company, 3D printing company that I worked with a while ago, who eventually, after almost a year of experimenting, figured out a customer acquisition cost of $5.90, and their average basket size with that customer acquisition cost was $75. And so when you get it right, you can suddenly start seeing that kind of hockey stick growth, because now they know for every $6 they put into the customers, they're getting roughly $70 out. So that's a business that obviously is scalable, and that we can happily invest a couple of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, into advertising, because we know that customer acquisition to lifetime value cost. A couple of other things, I talked about it a little bit earlier. Can you make something a little bit more difficult to guess? This is an application called Mailbox that came out a couple of years ago, where you had to join a queue. As you can see here, I was number 424,000, or 424,000th place, waiting to get access to the application. And for every one of my friends I invited, I got a little bit closer and closer and closer to the front. It was just a great way to kind of get people talking about the products before it launched to the public. Think about ways to turn your users into marketers. This was, the thing that really turned Hotmail, if people remember us, Microsoft's kind of first version of web-based email, a company they acquired and kind of repurposed. So this was one of the first companies to do this. So now when you use Gmail or any email provider, they'll always have this at the bottom: get your free email at Gmail, or get a gigabyte of free storage at Gmail. Well, Hotmail were the first ones to do it. So get your free email at Hotmail drove hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new users for that product. Are there interesting ways for you to kind of lock your users in as you go down that path? This is what Dropbox do. So they figured out that it costs between $233 and $388 in ad spend for each paying subscriber that they had. So they created this referral scheme where you could get direct invites, or you could get more space by inviting your friends. In the first 2 months that they did it, they generated 3 million referrals, and again understood that they could convert a single-digit percentage of those and generate significant revenue without that huge outlay of $300 per paying user. So is there a way you can lock people in, generate value from them as you onboard them? For people who are doing, and I realize I've talked a lot about consumer products here, but if you're doing a more B2B focused tool, do think about how you can prove that it works and prove that people like it. So HubSpot, Brandwatch, lots of companies do a great job of this, of having social proof where you can see, SEO Moz is a search engine optimization company, and so you can see here they've got 101,000 subscribers to their RSS feed, 126,000 followers on Twitter, etc. So you look at that and think, wow, they must be credible, or they have user testimonials here talking about how incredible they are. So it's little things like this that are super useful. Be nice to people. So I would say 50% of my wardrobe is T-shirts from startups. I'm like a walking billboard for companies that I've invested in, or companies that I've met or worked with or enjoyed coffee with over the years. And this is really powerful. You know, if you go to South by Southwest or Startup Istanbul or any conference, you'll see people walking around in SendGrid T-shirts, or, you know, hoodies from, you know, MailChimp, or any of these types of people. So if you can kind of give your users a free gift that also advertises you, and you know, Mixpanel do a great job of this. They send out free T-shirts to new users and to users who've been with them for a couple of months or years. It's a great way of, users think they're getting something special, but secretly what they're getting is a giant billboard for that brand to wear on their body. Again, and I can't say this enough times, talk to your customers. You know, automated email can create a little bit of a feedback loop and make people valued. And it's a great way to get that feedback. So again, with Keep and with Linguist and a couple of other companies that I work with, when you submit a support email or when you reply to some of the messaging that we send out, you get automated emails back from the CEO. They're not necessarily always from the CEO, although sometimes they are. But again, it just helps make people feel special. And I think outside of just your users, you know, continue on an ongoing basis to engage with press and bloggers and influencers and other folks. But talking to your customers is hugely valuable. You know, this is powerful, but don't use it all the time. Tell your users that you miss them. So if you're tracking your user engagement or individual user sessions, and you find that someone uses your product consistently for the first month, and then in the second month they start dropping off, you know, using tools like Intercom and others, you can figure out automated messaging that says, "Oh, we miss you. You know, we really want you to come back and kind of re-engage with the product again." And again, that can kind of help an awful lot with your retention rates. You know, these things genuinely matter. You know, Jawbone sends out notes with a lot of their products. I again, you know, see people walking around every city I've ever been in T-shirts from companies that I knew when they were, you know, 5 or 6 people. So, you know, this stuff really matters to your users and to the general public. When you make mistakes, don't be afraid to say sorry. You know, don't do what United Airlines did last week and, you know, blame the passenger or blame your users. When you screw up, do say sorry. This is a company whose board I'm on called Sorry with a Service, and they apologize on behalf of companies. So they work with a whole bunch of interesting businesses like TransferWise and Autoglass and lots of others, and send out physical and virtual apologies on their behalf, and have built a fantastic business because of it, and, you know, have demonstrated real ROI, you know, by doing simple apologies. And this matters, right? Because, you know, a 5% increase in customer retention can mean a 30% increase in profitability, right? Because your probability of selling something to an existing customer is 60 or 70%, whereas if you have new users coming in, you know, it's somewhere between 5 and 20%. And this here is an example of that. So amongst the many problems that it currently has, you know, one of the bigger issues Twitter had in the early days was its retention numbers were extremely low. So what would happen was people would sign up for Twitter, they would go in, they would post a tweet, and then they would come back 2 or 3 days later, and it would just be their tweet still sitting there. And then they would come back maybe 2 or 3 days after that, and it would still be their tweet still sitting there, and they would never come back again. And they had this huge drop-off rate. They couldn't quite figure it out until they realized that when people came back and all they saw was their tweet sitting there, it felt like they were kind of posting into the void. And so now when you sign up for Twitter, they force you to follow people, and they deliberately force you to follow noisy people. So you have to follow maybe, you know, the BBC, or you've got to follow Justin Bieber, or you've got to follow someone who's, you know, posting regularly on there, so that when you go back, it feels like the experience is a lot more dynamic as a result, nearly at the end. Smart notifications, you know, again, similar to what I said about social tools earlier, these can be tricky if you get them wrong, but if you get them right, push notifications at the right time can be hugely engaging and hugely powerful. Surveys and live chats covered kind of in Intercom. This is an interesting one. So, you know, Kissmetrics do a great job of it. HubSpot do an incredible job of it. You know, if you can be more than just the company, you know, HubSpot are great content marketers. Brandwatch, a company that I do some work with, are great content marketers. You know, I do webinars and videos and articles. I wrote this one for Mashable about apps to turn your ideas into prototypes. Build. If you can build a little bit on top of your business by adding content or adding expertise or something, that can be hugely beneficial and can allow you to do these kind of interesting drip email campaigns to your users who will sign up to receive more information as a result of the content that you share. So it can be a really interesting way of just engaging with people. And as you build and as you go, look for the aha moment, right? Look for what is it that kind of tips people from being interested users of your product into incredibly engaged users. So in 2011, Twitter figured out that once a person follows 30 people or more on the service, they're more or less active users forever. If they couldn't get you to follow 30 people, then it was unlikely you'd ever come back. With Facebook, they knew that once you get to 7 friends within 10 days, you were going to be a pretty well hooked user. With Dropbox, they know that once you put a file in a Dropbox folder, they're going to get you to come back, and they have a much higher chance of converting you to a paying user. So don't be afraid to look for that aha moment where you realize this is when we really start to engage and retain users. And don't be afraid to change if you find it. So Instagram originally launched as a location sharing app called Bourbon, and what they found was they were, people were checking in, but Foursquare and Gowalla and others were bigger at the time. But one little feature that they had in the product was the ability to add a filter to some of the photographs. And what they found were people were adding the filter to a photograph, saving the photograph, and then sharing it on Facebook or Twitter. And so they thought, well, hang on, if this is the kind of thing that people really love about our product, then maybe that's the thing we should build our product around. And so they pivoted the business into Instagram, created all of these filters, and 13 months later we're a $1 billion company in what was, I think, arguably one of the greatest ever acquisitions in startup and technology history. And all of these things, just to wrap it all up, are important because ultimately, there are probably tens of thousands of companies started all around the world every day. There are tons and tons of people, with ideas, sketching them out right now, talking to people like me. We're going through interview processes for Techstars right now, getting into accelerators, talking to investors, etc. And it's really, really important for you to stand out, really, really important to you to be different, to just, be a little bit more than the 10,000 other apps that are released on the App Store that day. And so hopefully some of the tips that are in here will be useful as you build and scale your products. Some of the tips in here will help you kind of stand out, will get that press attention or those partnerships, etc., that hopefully will be kind of crucial in you scaling your business. But that's it from me. I know we've gone a little bit over time, but apologies for the poor audio quality at the start. This is my email address and Twitter handle. If you have any questions or anything else, please don't hesitate to get in touch by email or Twitter. I've got another kind of. So what do we use for A/B testing? So we use typically I'll use Optimizely for kind of front end A/B testing, and then Intercom for message testing. Although we've also done some stuff with MailChimp as well for kind of email marketing. But certainly for kind of product front-end testing, Optimizely is I think by far the best. And then for kind of testing different types of messaging, we've used Intercom just because in most of the companies that I'm working with, Intercom is the platform that we're probably most integrated with. And you can kind of test email marketing, response rates, open rates, engagement rates, or survey on platform and on websites. Open rates and engagement rates there. So Intercom's a great one for that type of engagement. But certainly, if you're testing the front end of your app, etc., then Optimizely is a cool one. Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the webinar, and thank you to everyone for putting up. I know that mine was a bit crappy at the start, so thanks for that.
Eamonn,
please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Eamonn, thank you very much.
No problem, anytime, and hopefully I'll see some of you at Startup Turkey or Startup Istanbul later in the year.
Yes, I will be also sending you email for the invitation.
Awesome, guys. Well, listen, thank you so much for your attention, and
thank you, man.
Please don't hesitate to reach out with anything I can help with, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi dear, how are you? Hi. 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 Oldun yatıyor.